Hey guys, it is me, Matthew Ingram. I am back. I took a summer vacation off, but now I'm back. I'm back in school, and I'm back to do a show. We got Army on the side of production this time, since with us, and I'm here doing the show. And we're going to talk today about affirmative action, but not in the way that you're used to. Typically, people talk about affirmative action. They focus on the 60s and 70s and the resulting afterwards. You got the Alan Bach case. You've got various cases of Supreme Court decisions that relate to affirmative action. But as it stands now, there's a new push to focus on affirmative action in the 30s and 40s. But now I know what you're saying. You know what you're saying. You're saying 30s and 40s, affirmative action, that wasn't around then. You're talking about the New Deal, right? I'm talking about the New Deal, also known as affirmative action for the whites. Hit the intro, Army.
Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and it can feature in your front.
We're back.
So, as I said before, people like to think of affirmative action during the 60s and 70s, particularly during Lyndon Johnson's speech at Howard University. Now, at his speech at Howard University, Johnson defined affirmative action as being a sort of reparative justice, reparative policy for African Americans. There's a good quote that I think really strikes what he was talking about. He said, you don't take people who are for years have been hobbled by chains and liberate them, bring them to the start of a race, then say, you're free to compete with everyone else and pretend that it's a fair race. You just don't do that. He designed affirmative action as being a way to get blacks to the starting position in a way that they could fairly compete with the whites. Now, when Johnson said that, there's a lot of pushback to what he said. Their opponents were like, yeah, but I just don't think discrimination is good. It's like evil in all cases. You can't discriminate against white people. It's not how you do things. That's not how this history works. It's just not how you do it. And people put down a very reasoned argument for opposing affirmative action. And they put it down on two ideas. The first idea was that it relies on desert. If you're more skilled at a job and you're more qualified for a job, then you have a right to get that job. That was the first idea. The second idea was justified on the principle that discrimination in any case for any reason was always evil. People who say this usually cite the 14th Amendment as being the reason why. The 14th Amendment obviously is the equal opportunity one, the one that says any discrimination based on race, gender, color, not something you can do. Now, these are pretty certifiable objections to affirmative action, but I think they fail for separate reasons. The first case, the case that people who are qualified deserve the job, it's not very clear why they have that. It's not clear that there's a direct link between being qualified for a job and deserving the job. This is because it's a difference between desert and compensation. Affirmative action is based on the idea of compensation rather than desert. When we have a history of racial policies, a history of racial injustices done to a community, it only makes sense to implement a racially based solution for that injustice. So if you think of affirmative action as being purely something based on desert, based on rights, you're fundamentally missing the point of what the policy is. It's not how the policy works. Also, the other reason that discrimination is evil in all cases, it's not entirely true. If you think about it from a sort of utilitarian standpoint, if you take the harm that one individual receives for not receiving a job, and compare it to the potential benefit that an African American can get from the job and how he's able to distribute that wealth through communities, they're not even comparable. And you don't even have to agree with utilitarianism to see that. It's just based on pure intuition that an individual harm compared to the potential uplift of a community is not comparable. So, affirmative action opponents are kind of stuck in these two arguments, and they don't really have a good reason for them, but among the common consensus of white people, that's what they hold to. But if you're to take a look at it, reason through it, you'd see that there isn't really a strong reason to oppose affirmative action. You think that it should be the default position that we should just accept affirmative action based on it being a historical readdress or historical rejustice for the black injustice that was committed. But I think that argument is missing something critical. As it stands, not a lot of people are convinced by affirmative action. There's around 70% of people who were surveyed during the 1990s or 2000s or so, and around 70% of them said they were opposed to affirmative action based on the reasons I just listed. And this is college. They've probably taken some political science courses, so they have like an intuition or they have a reason to oppose affirmative action, but at the same time, they just don't really see what the goal of affirmative action is. So I think there needs to be a stronger argument, one that is still based on historical injustices, but one that is a very specific historical injustice and is tied to the reasons for supporting affirmative action. Now, the reason for supporting affirmative action relies entirely on the New Deal. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying the New Deal, affirmative action, two historically different. One, you compare candidates, you say who gets the job, and the New Deal is a response to the Depression, the overall era of just complete economic depression. You just can't compare the two. They're not the same. They're not the same. I think this objection is technically correct, but if you look at the history of the New Deal, you'll see that it's entirely based on social benefits for whites at the exclusion of blacks.
It wasn't, and this was, to be clear, this wasn't because white people deserved. This wasn't a matter of desert.
No, it was not a matter of desert. It was a matter of intentional racial policies that excluded the black community from the New Deal. It wasn't by accident. You don't look at the complete racial inequality that has persisted in the United States and say, oh, it's kind of an accident. It's not like an accident like you leave, you go cook some burgers, leave, come back, you smell smoke. It's like you put a propane tank in the living room, aluminum foil in the microwave, and then you jump out the window. That's not an accident. That's completely intentional. And it was intentionally started during the New Deal. That's how it happened. So I'm going to break down the three main New Deal policies, right? You have Social Security, the Fair Labor Law, and the Wagner Act, and the GI Bill. And to start with, I'm going to focus on Social Security. Army, can you put up clip 2? Oh, you got it. Cool. Now, the way they excluded blacks during the New Deal was based on specific policy of excluding farm workers and maids. Now, during the 1930s and 40s, most African Americans, either male or female, were working as a sharecropper or as a maid. And most importantly, these weren't really stable jobs. They didn't have stable wages, the hours were out of whack, the conditions were absolutely terrible. It was not uncommon to work for over 80 hours a week and receive $8 in pay.
All right, so just to be clear, we're talking about 75% of the Southern workforce were farm workers and domestic help.
Yes, this was an era before the era of the sort of black professionals or middle class.
60% nationwide of the black labor force, but 75% of the Southern black labor force did windows and pick stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dixiecrats.
So, when the New Deal was formed, and they excluded based racially by excluding the farmers and the maids, that was done through an intentional process of making sure the black people did not receive the benefits of Social Security. And now, even for people who did, even for the black professionals, the black industry workers, the black teachers, they did not receive the same benefits. They did not receive the same benefits. And this is for one reason only. When Roosevelt and his contemporaries were designing the New Deal, right? They said that they wanted to decentralize the admission of benefits to the states. This wasn't something that Roosevelt himself came up with. This was mostly proposed through the Southern Democrats in Congress and the House of Representatives. But they knew that if the blacks received the New Deal benefits, it would be much harder to retain that second-class labor force for them, and it'd be much harder for them to control the black population from making historical claims of justice on America. So they knew that they had to exclude the two professional jobs that most black people held in order to keep them as the second class and the secondary labor force. But as I was saying before, even the black industry workers, they didn't receive the same benefits. During the 1938 or so, they did a study. They did a study in comparison of people who received, or white workers who received Social Security in comparison to black workers who received Social Security. White workers, on average, received $19 to $34 a month, and for blacks, it ranged under $8 a month. That's about like a 100, 200% difference. So even if you weren't a sharecropper or a maid, you're still receiving unjust and undistributable and unequal amounts of Social Security in comparison to your white workers, which is it's hard to deal with. It's hard to build a community. It's hard to build a middle class when you're receiving not the equal amounts that the whites did. And all of these deals did lead to a white middle class, as we'll look on later on. But the black wealth just sort of stagnated around the same point. You would see like white wealth increase by the 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, so on and so on. Black wealth would go like 1.01, 1.02. It wouldn't catch up. It wouldn't catch up. And it would be because of Social Security and the other bills I'm going to talk about that didn't receive and didn't distribute the same amount of wealth to the black community. But moving on from Social Security, you also have the Fair Labor Law. You can put the other clip up. I think it's clip 3. Yeah, Fair Labor Law. Now, the way the Fair Labor Law was originally implemented in the Wagner Act 2, you would have to have a stable and secure job and also your employer's consent before you could apply, or before you would be able to receive the benefits of a 40-hour work week and the minimum wage. And now, as I said before, sharecropping and maids, these aren't stable and secure jobs. They're constantly fluctuating in pay and hours. So if you were to go to a federal worker, or if you were to complain to the federal office and say, hey, my boss is working me 180 hours a week, is there something you can do about this? They look at you and say, hey, you're a sharecropper, you're a maid, your job history, it's not consistent. It's not consistent at all. There's not much we can do for you. I guess you just have to go back to the fields and work 80 hours. And this is what they would do. They would discriminate based on your race and based on your job and assign you less benefits in comparison to the white workers. And it's critical that they didn't get the fair labor provisions that they did. Because if you're working over 80 hours a week and you're working for under $8 an hour, under $10 an hour, it's going to be very difficult, very, very difficult, again, to build back up that wealth.
An hour or week?
About.
Well, no, you said you're working for $8 an hour?
$8 an hour a week. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, it's hard to build a black middle class with that. But in comparison to the white middle class, they're working that 40-hour minimum or that 40-hour maximum, and they're getting that minimum wage, which I believe around the time was much higher than $8 an hour. It was 10 or 12. So
relative to cost of living. Yeah.
Relative to the cost of living. So if you're a white worker under the Fair Labor Act, you'd work for the week, go home, build a family, maybe shop around for some loans to get a house, and then build a community around that in a way that the black community could not, because you'd be working over these long periods of time and working for minimum wage, and it's not enough income to really substantially build yourself up or build your community, which is a major problem. It's a major problem. And again, even if you're a black industry worker, even if you're a black businessman, which was very rare, you'd still have to have your employer's consent to apply or to get your company to apply to these 40-hour maximums in minimum wage. So you'd go to your boss, you'd say, hey, Fair Labor Act just came out, Wagner Act just came out. Is there any way for this company to implement these work weeks, these work hours, and this minimum wage? Your boss will get, yeah, sure, we can do that, but not for you. If you contact the federal workers, don't come back here. You won't have a job. You just go away. Find a sharecropping business or something.
So you have a law, but not enforcement with black people.
No.
So we have a law that formally protects us, but nobody's willing to enforce to make sure that we're secured under it.
Right. And this, again, was because the New Deal was decentralized. It was given to the states. And during this time, the southern states were mostly Democrats and mostly Dixiecrats, and people were just generally very racist. They were implementing Jim Crow policies, and they were given oversight over how the New Deal worked and how the New Deal benefits were doled out. So if you're at the local level, you're at the state level, and there's anything you want to do to get the fair labor benefits, there's just no way, because the state officials and local officials would simply penalize you and simply not enforce the laws as they were told to by Roosevelt in order to dole out the benefits to black people.
So what people don't understand about the New Deal, what needs to be expressed more seriously, is that people learn, that it's about Roosevelt. The New Deal has as much to do, like the way the New Deal works in American life, especially in American black life, it has as much to do with the Southern Democratic Legislature as it does with Roosevelt. So when you learn about the New Deal in school, you should also learn about how the Dixiecrats found a way to make all of these great benefits exclude black people from all of these benefits. That's the story that's not told.
Yeah.
So that's as important as the New Deal itself, the fact that we were left out of it. And you have to understand that in America, if you're left out of a massive program, that means that massive program ends up feeding on you.
Yeah, and increases the distribution or the inequality.
The inequality, so it makes you food. So we have so not only did you create a lot of white wealth, you created a lot of black vulnerability by locking them out.
Yeah. I also think we miss out on how much political power and political organization and political work went into the Southern Democrats lobbying for the New Deal being decentralized. It wasn't like the Northern lawmakers were simply just up there like, hey, I think the Southerners had the point. They did pretty dirty political deals and political lobbying to get the New Deal decentralized. It wasn't something Roosevelt entirely intended by himself.
And we know about this in current times, because anytime a federal program is administered by the states, it's not good for us. This is the same with welfare, right? Like welfare reform, what Clinton did was throw it to the states, and it turns out the states with a lot of black people, reform meant let's find a way to get black people
out of our state.
So
move these Negroes on. Welfare problem.
anytime you want to, when you want to desegregate schools and you throw it to the state, the schools don't get desegregated. It took the National Guard. Yeah. So throwing these big programs that's supposed to secure our rights and livelihoods to the states is pretty much just forsaking us to the Klan.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because I have friends who are libertarians. That's always my argument to them, is they're like, states' rights. I'm like, have you seen what the state does?
States' rights is like, this way we can get black people. States, that's pretty much because at the federal level, it's harder. But at the state level, we can really stick it to black people.
Yeah.
So when states' rights is a low-key dog whistle.
Yeah. And that's how it's historically been throughout the history. Yeah. The Southern lawmakers, they've always focused on getting states' rights because they knew at the state level and the local level, they could more easily manage it. If you're dealing with all the federal bureaucracy and whatnot, it makes it hard to oppress black people. But if you're at the state and local level, it's easy to just squash the individual.
This is great too, because he says, for example, leaving execution to the states.
Yeah.
Leaving execution to the states. I want to.
We've seen how those numbers work out for black people.
No. Exactly. If we're as a nation killing people, then we should, as a nation, kill or not kill people.
Yeah.
But leaving it to the states means that we kill black people.
Yeah.
Disproportionately.
Even in a way, even if we were to pass the anti-lynching bills that were proposed through the Northerners, those would still probably just be regulated by the state and local officials in the South, because the Northerners, they wouldn't have the manpower or political power to enforce that sort of anti-lynching law in the South.
Or even the political will.
Well,
that too.
There's a reason why Reconstruction, Reconstruction could have done something, but then we left it to the states, which means we pretty much banned it to the Klan. Also, block grants. If we're serious about securing some of these neighborhoods, we have to be serious about securing some of these neighborhoods, not just leave it to the states and then find out the local officials did what they did with it.
Yeah. And they specifically chose state and local officials who they knew were racist. They didn't just assign it to some random Joe Schmo. They picked out their friends and their colleagues who they knew would implement the policies based on a racial bias.
Well, of course they knew they were racist. They were all in the same KKK meetings.
That is also true.
Of course they knew they were racist. They were all in the same KKK meetings. By the way, there is a great book. I'm going to get... keep talking, Matthew.
Okay. But moving on from the fair labor, we have probably the most important bill out of the New Deal, which was the GI Bill. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the GI Bill, I hate to cite him, but Bill Clinton called the GI Bill the best deal Uncle Sam had ever made, which is pretty true. It made numerous social benefits for the white veterans who were coming home from World War II. I'm talking about housing loans, employment fairs, employment agencies, college admissions, pretty much every essential that you think is essential to building a black middle class or building a middle class in general. The GI Bill did it. The GI Bill made provisions, they made agencies, they made the budget for it. So when it turns out, as the other New Deal acts went where the blacks were excluded and it was given to the states level, the GI Bill went the same way. Now, it's a bit different than how it went during the 30s and the 40s, or the early 40s, in comparison to the GI Bill. And this is mostly due to a man named John E. Rankin. I think I have a clip of him. It should be clip 4 or 5.
Oh, there you go. Oh.
Yeah. Oof. Now, Johnny Rankin's sort of he's sort of a mysterious figure, but I think we know enough about him to realize his claims. He is probably the most unequivocally bigoted and racist Senateman and Congressman we have ever had in the history of the United States.
That is such a bold statement.
It is a bold statement. It is a bold
The
statement.
guy from North Carolina that didn't acknowledge the black baby.
Like, I don't know. That's such a bold, like,
I
most racist?
I have some evidence.
Back it up.
So, Johnny Rankin was infamous for always referring to black people in Congress as the N-word. And this wasn't like something that just happened by accident. This wasn't something that just a slip of the tongue. Like one time, one of his fellow Democrats heard him say it. He was like, "Oh, he didn't mean the N-word. He said Negro. He said Negro." Johnny Rankin stood back up, not even called on, and said, "No, I meant the N-word. I specifically meant to say the N-word." Easily most racist. And he's from Missouri, which is like a plus 20 to the racist scale anyway. So he's definitely up there. If he's not the most, he's up there. But he knew something. He knew that when the black veterans came back from World War II, they would be younger, they'd be more active, and they'd be more willing to make historical claims on the U.S. and willing to make those claims based on they served for the country. They had honor now. They had a specific right and specific need to get these social benefits from the GI Bill. But unfortunately, Rankin, he had some political power, he had some political knowledge, and he knew how to maneuver. So he took this sort of framework of setting and excluding apart black communities from the social deal, the New Deal in the 30s. He sort of implemented it in a new way to the 1940s. Essentially, Rankin relied on a sort of lobbying business or lobbying group known as the American Legion. And the American Legion was sort of like a very conservative, very white and powerful male-focused group during the 1940s. And he used the Legion along with several other political deals about other things. He used that to lobby, again, for the GI Bill being decentralized and being given to the states to enforce. Because he knew that he couldn't just exclude black people based on name alone in the bill. He couldn't say that black people, the GI Bill is not for you. He couldn't write that. No one would want that. But he also knew that if it was given to the state and local level, as it was before, he could exclude them, and he could exclude based racially and on profession black people from getting the benefits of the GI Bill. Now, this has pretty huge implications, very large implications, because the GI Bill is what built the white middle class in this country. Almost, not entirely, but almost single-handedly. Take housing, for example, right? Now, during the 1935, 36 or so, the federal government only insured around 6% of housing loans. After the GI Bill, that number went to 50%. 50% of housing bills were insured. Black people did not get the same benefits. If they went to apply for a housing loan, they were excluded. They were said, no. Sometimes they even give a reason. And they knew that they didn't have to give a reason because there's no one from the federal government enforcing the GI Bill in the southern states.
But, well, this is actually even the federal government's complicit because with the GI Bill, the FHA put out a pamphlet saying don't don't back loans in these specific areas.
Yeah.
And those specific areas were picked out because they had black people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the federal government's complicit in that. So the GI Bill is great if you could live in an area with white people, but the only way you could live in an area with white people was to be white, or to be not black.
And you could not have like the amount of wealth and the amount of time to move to an area of white people too, because the white people themselves, this was 1940s, they're still racist. You might get lynched, like you might just get kicked out. So it's not exactly a foolproof option to move into the area of white people.
No,
it's not
because they don't want to make their neighborhood a neighborhood that doesn't get GI loans.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to sell to you. Yeah, exactly. The real estate agents, if they sell to you, like you'll be their last sale.
Homeowners association?
Yeah,
Oh, I
homeowners
mean,
association. That
Yeah.
those.
And also, it's not even housing loans either. It was the increase of down payments too. Down payments went from being something that would happen, it would be waived over like a year or so, to being waived over 30 years. So even if you're a white veteran from like a poor economic family, and you got back and you got the down payment and the loan for the GI Bill, you were set. You were almost entirely set, because your down payment was waived for 30 years. That gives you enough time and enough income to get your life and your community and your family get started and all together. And the loan was insured. So even if somehow you failed, there wasn't really too much of a big loss that you were taking. So it made moving into the suburbs and moving away from pretty much all the black people in your area a lot more economically sensible, a lot more economically efficient, and not even much of a risk as it was before. Which is big. It's just why you see in the 1950s and 1960s and so on and so forth, white people slowly moving out of the states into the suburbs with places like Levittown and whatnot. And this is where it started. The GI Bill is where it started because they had the economic and federal benefits to do so. It's not even housing either. It's also education. So when the GI Bill, when it comes to education, they sort of did like an affirmative action sort of thing with admission to colleges, right? When it came to college admissions, if you were a white veteran, it was almost guaranteed that you're going to get into your selected college. And it wasn't even a matter of space either, because as the GI Bill increased, the amount of staff officers in the colleges increased. So they're always increasing the care capacities for potential undergraduates. So if you're a white veteran and you wanted to go to college for whatever reason, you wanted to be a doctor, lawyer, dentist, whatever, it was pretty much a guarantee that you're going to get in. It was pretty much a guarantee that you're going to be trained by professionals and people who are well educated on the matter. And it was pretty much a guarantee that you're going to be set for life as far as education goes. And this is a time where education and income are pretty well correlated too. If you were more highly educated, it was more likely that you were going to get a higher paying job, which it's muddied now, but during the 1940s and 1950s, it was a pretty one-to-one correlation. So having education was pretty much the equivalent of having a high-paying job. It would just pay out later. And it's not even education and the admissions either. The rate of tuitions for veterans and the extremities, it was easily paid for the federal government. So right now we have sort of like a debt loan crisis among colleges. But during the GI Bill, not even an issue. Tuition almost entirely paid for, and extremities like books, housing, living, food, whatnot, easily paid for. And because there's a money stipulation along with the GI Bill, you could use some of that to pay for your funds while you're in college. So going to college, if you're a white veteran, no brainer. Easily the most sensible and economically efficient way to build yourself up back and build yourself up towards the middle class. Now, there are some black communities and some black professionals who benefited from the GI Bill, as there always will be. And this is where we can start to see the growth of a black middle class, right? There are some colleges, not all of them, but there's some like University of Chicago that were starting to allow blacks more into them. There's some integrated intuitions that blacks could go to and get admitted to and receive the same sort of quality of education that whites were receiving. But it wasn't entirely the same, because even though education wasn't as strictly policed by state and local officials as it was during the GI Bill, you still had to deal with the fact that during the 1940s, America was still segregated. So if you were a black in the South, a black veteran, and you wanted to go to college, your only option pretty much was a HBCU. And the HBCUs at the time, heavily underfunded. I believe it's a university in Missouri called Elkhorn State or something similar, but they could only admit up to 400 graduates or 400 undergraduates. Not even 1,000, only 400. You're basically fighting with other black people to get admitted into colleges. And if you're fighting with other black people to get admitted to colleges, that means that some people are going to be left out, and those people are going to be left out. They're going to stagnate. They aren't going to receive the same benefits as the white counterparts did. They're going to stagnate in terms of wealth. Now, it's not entirely true that the HBCUs were sort of underfunded. There were some that offered some specializations, some that offered vocation training, and there are some that did do the sort of increasing in education, increasing in economical entertainment that the whites did. But the HBCUs that did the specialization, it wasn't enough. I think it was around, you want to say something?
No, I mean, it wasn't enough, but what it does do is create the quality of symbols that confuse everybody, right? Like, I think MLK said it the best when he was talking about Ralph Bunche. It's like everyone acts like they see Ralph Bunche, who at the time was, the ambassador to the UN, as if, like, Ralph Bunche doing well is good for everybody else. Yeah. As if and we did it with Obama.
Yeah.
We got lead in the water, but, like, a nice picture of Obama as a presidency, which means we're all right.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's true. You can't give your kid, a picture of Obama as their inheritance.
No,
like you can't say like it's okay. I can't afford my property taxes, but I have a picture of Obama with a robo signature on it. That doesn't work to get my tax relief.
What are you talking? I mean, you are not allowed to say that about their Obama.
Don't you take my first black president. No, that's fine. That's fine. But I really do think that, and Mercer Baradowan's book, The Color of Money, actually goes in pretty well about this, about how the intentional creation of symbols to kind of neuter black politics was federal and state policy. So anytime you find someone else using a loophole,
You're saying that in past tense.
Yeah, no, people still lose.
Well, no, I mean just about the image of, we were just talking about Obama.
Right.
Symbols created to neuter black politics.
Symbols created.
One America.
And they're symbols too. They aren't the real thing. Like Obama, he was an immigrant, but most African Americans are descendants of slaves.
I was thinking about that recently, that he was the first black president not descended from slaves.
Yeah. And with Kamala Harris, we might get the second.
Who likes locking up black people?
Yeah.
This is not good.
Yeah, no, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Complicated business.
Yeah. But yeah, it's as Rami said, the creation of symbols and the sort of like the few black middle class that was created at the time. And that's not what the GI Bill was meant to do, and it was not what it was doing for the white counterparts at the time. It was building an actual white middle class at the time, but for the black middle class, it was only maybe a fraction of symbols, and people were able to strive and actually be the middle class. But for the rest of the blacks, they were just looking up. Yeah. They were looking up.
Yeah, I mean, people have to. I mean, I could bring up the numbers because we actually have numbers. Are you doing better than you were in 2000? Like, symbols don't pay the bills.
No.
Symbols don't pay them. Like, are you doing better than
we get hit by cars and no one says anything? We're not doing better
than we were in 2007. Black people, like 2004. Yeah. It's really weird, and we can't talk like this, but it's really weird. The times I'm ever making money in my life, it's with Republican presidents, and white people are not doing well. But like somehow I'm employed and doing fine. Like, it just happens to be that way, like for complicated reasons.
Look, let's look at all the numbers. Are we doing better than we were in 1984? Cops didn't shoot us in the streets in 1984.
Well, Rodney King, I was in LA at the time.
That was 90.
92.
Two.
93,
Yeah,
91.
like,
I mean, we didn't have cell phone videos and all that stuff. I think
that's true.
it's complicated.
Yeah, it's a bit different. Yeah.
But according to all the data, and I'm going to try to get up some numbers, we haven't been doing well. Like the black masses, symbols come up and symbols go down. Shonda Rhimes is doing well.
Yeah.
Oprah's doing well.
I think there's a last clip too. It should be called last clip in the folder, but it basically shows what you're talking about the median wealth between black and white families. For white families, it went swoop, and then for black families, it just.
Can we also address the idea that Oprah is our idea of rich? Bezos woke up tomorrow with Oprah's money, he would kill himself.
That's true. She is our idea of rich.
Like, she's our idea of rich.
But every now and then, Oprah's got to hustle for money if she wants a project done.
Hell yeah!
She can't
She
just
got
write.
Jeff.
She can't write. She can't write a check to make a movie. You know, she's got to get investors.
Everyone's talking about Chandra. She's doing so much. Yeah, she's working.
Chandra gets paid a salary.
Yeah. She didn't get to sit at home and just make money by being her.
Yeah, she gets.
Warren Buffett sits at home and makes money.
And the thing about this, it's like 100,000 wealth times 100 for the millionaires like Jeff Bezos we have now. But for people like Oprah, it's like a history of like $1,000 times 100, which is what we have now. It's completely different starting points.
So, yeah, just wealth and people just understanding how much like property. Apparently, there's a saying for this in the South. I didn't know. For white people who are generationally wealthy, when you ask them what they do, they say he sells cotton. That means they don't do nothing.
Apparently doing commercials for TV dinners out here.
Okay, so Oprah's still doing commercials for other people. She doesn't own that company.
Yeah, like Oprah's still doing commercials. Weight Watchers. That's right.
She's still like negotiating Weight Watchers deals. Sean Penn.
That's not rich.
Like,
That's not rich at all.
Pay Sean Combs to sell vodka and what's his name, 50 Cent to sell vodka. He doesn't own that company.
Yeah, I think P. Diddy says something similar too.
Yeah.
When was Jeff Bezos in a commercial?
You don't see it like he doesn't know. He owns the studio.
Yeah, he doesn't need that money. He doesn't need it at all.
The network. Jeff Bezos has cities begging him to open his oppression shops in their cities.
And you don't think that guy's got cousins who are also hooked up?
Yeah, he's got a whole history and he's got a whole family.
There's a show I want to do, but I haven't, gathered up the will to do it. About why so many black people who do well, especially black women, are single without kids. And I'm thinking about
support the damn family.
Yeah, getting attached to a black man is a liability.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about Condoleezza Rice. I'm thinking about Oprah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Shonda Rhimes. Is she attached to a black man?
Yeah.
Is she attached to a man? Like, there's a liability that goes along with being a black. Really winning means you should be able to get married without without worrying about going away.
For like most black billionaires, it's like your family is your child. It's like speaking financially.
This is a good time. I'll prep the audience. I'm gonna segue into that Cosby guy who was found working at Trader Joe's.
Okay,
Go ahead, man.
Oh, okay. But yeah, even outside of housing and education, in terms of the loans and the monetary benefits that were doled out by the GI Bill, blacks didn't really have access to that either. And it was because of the decentralized nature of it. Again, it was because that they would go to state and local officials and they would be excluded from that. And there would be no enforcing policy, no national government that they could really appeal to get those benefits or have those benefits disputed for them. And I think it's important to realize that when the New Deal happened and when the GI Bill happened, it was through the approval of the northern legislators. It wasn't something that you could easily appeal to through the federal government. It wasn't something you could easily take to Supreme Court cases. It wasn't something you could easily rely on through the system of checks and balances to dole out. If you got denied that loan or that monetary benefit, you were so out of luck. And that monetary loan and that monetary benefit was absolutely crucial to building a middle class and absolutely crucial to building yourself back up. So, I'm not sure if it's up right now, but there should be a picture of the wealth distribution. But as it turns out, because of the GI Bill, whites increased up into the 100,000s in terms of median wealth. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It shows that after the 40s or so, it increased by like from a three times difference of white wealth and black wealth to like a 7 times.
20th century was good to white people.
Oh, so you named
Yep.
a century it wasn't?
Wow, but to like all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, it was because of the GI Bill.
America worked for them.
Yeah, it increased from 3 times to 7 times, 8 times. I think it should be nearly like 10 times on there. It should be like around 10 times the wealth of black people. And that's because they had the GI Bill to build off of. The blacks didn't have that. They're excluded out of that.
And I was talking to my friend about this. He said, like, look, it was the GI Bill and also the war economy. His family made money by, being a small contractor with the government contract for the war economy. And those contracts won't go into black people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Still, I'll do yet another show on that. Let me get this because I'm feeling some sort of way about this. Hold on, let me find
loved him.
We're gonna talk about Owen. Yeah.
Like I'm still upset about this.
Well, let me.
Where my feelings?
I heard. Is it? Hold on. So, everybody remembers the Cosby Show. Well, everybody who watched this show remembers the Cosby Show. You remember the Cosby Show? We were doing all right because Bill Cosby was doing all right, and like he kind of adjusted our dreams about what we could do and anything was possible. But it turns out, do you remember Irwin, the guy who played Sandra's husband? He's working at Trader Joe's.
Not
working
good.
at Trader Joe's.
Not good.
He's 58 years old working at Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
And he was on the show for the entire run. He'd only do 7-8 episodes per season.
Yeah.
But he's working at Trader Joe's.
He wasn't a one-hit wonder.
No, he wasn't one. No, he had a steady gig. In theory, he should have been networked into wealth. His dad was a congressman. And this isn't an issue that is a matter of, this isn't about he had a drug problem.
No.
This is about he just ran out of money.
Yeah. He didn't have like a rich cousin.
He didn't have
No.
there wasn't enough stable wealth to make that happen.
Yeah, he didn't have like a history of that wealth to rely back on. He didn't have the family to rely back on.
He probably had lent some money. Maybe he had a business to go down. But this isn't drugs that led him to that. This is just I was living in New York and I ran out of money. All that the Cosby. Thing about black money is even if it's old, it runs out. White money grows. Black money runs out. So that's Owen from the Cosby Show checking you out at the
Trader Joe's.
At the Trader Joe's. And I said this before that honestly, there had to be drugs involved for a white person to be in that situation.
And not even just purely drugs, but the exclusion and the separation that comes from doing drugs from the family.
That means if they got clean, they would get sucked back into a cousin
business. Right.
Tom Lowe still has a career.
Yeah. So Owen didn't Jeffrey Owens. There's no reason to believe that he had a drug habit. There's every reason to believe that he just ran out of money.
Yeah.
He just was a black man who ran out of money.
Yeah, and he had to go back to a Trader Joe's or a low-paying job.
Well, he was doing that was an NBC show. Right, that was NBC
That's
doing
solid
7 episodes a season, with lines and stuff. So a lot of money changed hands. It wasn't cable. That was an NBC show, the highest rated. He was on it when it was number 1.
He was he was in the Cosby Show intro.
He
That's
was
a big deal.
Yeah, because that means he gets licensing every time
He
they.
was in the one where they're dressed up like the 20s and dancing. He was in that intro.
He was in the Cosby Show intro. He was a named character on a network show.
But now he's working at Trader Joe's.
Apparently he's not even a dumb guy. He
Probably
just
not.
ran out of money.
Yeah.
There are a lot of black people with all sorts of degrees. I say this guy. I too, after I graduated from Berkeley, did not go to work for Deloitte and Touche. Did not work for Anderson Consulting back when there was Anderson Consulting. You know what I had to do because I needed money? I worked at a grocery store.
Yeah.
I worked at a grocery store for years.
Because you don't have the money to
and
get
then I worked
access.
at a bookstore.
Yeah.
For years, and that's where I went. I had a Berkeley degree, so there's just not money. There are black people with who do all of the right things who just run out of money, and this guy was one of them.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Owens.
And they don't have the federal insurance or the federal benefits to help them out when they run out of money or when they run out of
Put the camera
connections.
back on Matthew.
But yeah, including housing, education. The final thing I want to say about the GI Bill was the employment agencies and the vocational schools. Now, the vocational schools kind of worked in a very weird way. They're sort of like private vocational schools, and it was the state's job and it was the locals' jobs to oversee that they're giving adequate education to them and adequate resources to them. But as we've seen so far, it turns out it didn't work in the way black people thought it was going to work. Well, what happened was you'd go to the school, right? You turn out, if you got in the first place, because the spaces at these schools, there wasn't a lot of spaces. There wasn't enough amount of teachers to teach the students. But if you got in, it turns out you're being charged exuberant rates, over like 200 times or 200% more than the white vocational schools in the white areas that the vocational schools are in. You're getting charged 200%, 2 times as much. 2 times. And if you're getting charged 2 times as much, you think you would be able to get like a 2 times as much quality education. No, it didn't work that way. It turns out that when you got into the private vocational schools, you were given either low quality teachers or actual scam artists, white scam artists who would think they would teach you something, and it turns out they actually had no experience in the field. They had no idea what they were talking about. They were basically just taking your money.
The reason they're working at a black vocational school is that they didn't have the credentials to work at a white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is so they go to a nice school. You get the University of Phoenix.
Yeah.
You get Trump U.
Yeah, and you're paying like Princeton fees for like a University of Phoenix education.
Right.
It's not equal at all. And when you go out into the field and try to apply for these jobs, of course, you're not going to be able to see the same successes that the white counterparts were seeing because you weren't educated as well. And this is still the time of where education, income, highly correlated with one another, almost directly correlated. So if you weren't as well educated as someone else, you weren't making as much. And if you're not making as much, you end up like the Bill Cosby character, working at Trader Joe's. You end up in a poor position, and you end up not having the resources and the wealth to build yourself a middle class and to move out into the suburbs and to begin a history of that wealth benefits. And it's difficult. It's difficult. So,
and then money creates money because if you do move out in the suburbs in the 60s, that house appreciates faster than the house.
Yeah.
Where black people live.
So I'm black people. It appreciates because they pay for whiteness. So it'll appreciate faster. So the money in the 60s actually just grew. White money grew faster than black money.
It's not even that money creates money. It's the lack of money also perpetuates more lack of money. Wow. So if you start out with nothing, it's pretty likely that you're going to end up worse than nothing or somehow go into negative. It's how we start to see sort of negative wealth happen. I think there was a study by Sandy Darity that was released last year or like within the past 3 months, but showed that when black women come out of college, they have a negative wealth. They have a negative net worth. I think it's like a negative 1,700 or something similar, but it's negative. Like, I don't know what to say. It's negative. Like, you don't have any resources. You don't even have like $1 to make moves. You don't even have like $10 to invest and do stocks. Like, you have negative that you're owed to other people. Other people have claims over you that they can make based on money.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, so we gotta wrap it up pretty soon. But
Okay.
Pick up the kids from daycare.
Okay, cool. But yeah, that was the problem with the GI Bill. The GI Bill excluded blacks from being able to get the same benefits that the white counterparts did. And as a result of that, we saw the wealth inequality increase. We saw the white middle class being made without the black middle class. And we saw a small amount of black middle class being developed, but nothing in comparison to the white middle class and nothing in comparison to the amount of wealth they have. So to bring it back to affirmative action, I think it's pretty clear that we don't even need affirmative action anymore. We need like a black GI Bill or a black New Deal or something that's going to offer the same amount of social benefits. Like at the very least, you can give us affirmative action. At the very least, based off the GI Bill and based off the history of exclusion, of not being able to build a middle class, at the very least, you can justify giving us the GI Bill or giving us affirmative action. But
we need a jobs bill. We need guaranteed jobs.
But as it stands...
And land, that'd be nice too.
That would be nice. It would be nice. But as it stands, affirmative action is not going to black people. it's going mostly to white women. I wish I had a clip of it, but there should be like an article that says white women are receiving more benefits of affirmative action in comparison to black applicants. And it's curious to see like how that can happen. Because even after the GI Bill, even after the 50s and 60s, even after the Civil Rights era, you think we would be able to recognize the historical injustices, the specific historical injustices that we've been committing to black communities. But as it turns out, it's just being refunneled into gender politics and being refunneled towards white women having more access and building their own sort of enclave. Which is weird because you think they would be a part of the white middle class, but like at the same time they're not. So it's very muddied. But as it stands, they're the ones who are receiving the benefits from affirmative action.
We like to pretend that white women don't share bank accounts with white men.
Yeah, that's not true.
That's like we like to pretend that they don't get inheritances from.
Nah,
it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Or they live in different houses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. They don't. They go to the same schools. Their houses appreciate with white men houses. Yeah.
More than we're making in a year.
Yeah.
Or I was assaulted once, so that's the same as 400 years of slavery.
Yeah.
But yeah, they think that that's what allows them to justify their current top of the place or top of the hierarchy in terms of affirmative action. But it's not. It's not how history has worked.
Yeah, we should really do the gender breakdown because they're like, well, we only make 77 cents an hour. Well, forget the fact that black people only make 62 and 63 cents an hour. But we should really do that breakdown by household.
Yeah,
like
income.
The household gap.
Yeah,
because you might make 70 cents. But like your husband makes the whole damn dollar. And you guys split bills. You know? Yeah, your son, so it's not like you never see, you're around that whole dollar.
Yeah.
Whereas like when black communities we're talking about concentrated poverty.
Yeah, both of your parents can be working and you will make like half of that dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the same. Not the same. But that's all I had for today. I hope you learned about the history of affirmative action and learned a more concrete, more reasoned, and more specific argument towards supporting affirmative action than you might have previously thought. And of course, donate to the show, donate to the Black Athenians. If you go to thefunkyacademic.com or thefunkyacademic.com, either one, you should be able to see a donation bar on the side. You're able to kick down a donation, helps pay for me, helps pay for the camera, helps pay for the studio, helps pay for Project, who we're doing the show, of course, Project Flanagan Studios, artists in local Athens. If you need anything, really, Project probably does it. So hit them up.
That's kind of true.
That is so true. If you need to know where businesses are,
any of the things.
You need to know how to get grants.
You need business consulting.
Yeah, business consulting, painting.
I don't think he does windows, but he knows somebody.
Yeah,
I bet he does.
yeah, he probably does. Yeah, he can hook you up. But yeah, that's all I had today. Thanks for the show.